In Jewish texts, it's said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Many years ago, tensions arose in the Middle East and it resulted in a war. In 1967, the State of Israel, having only just been established in not more than 20 years prior, found itself under attack from every side, from about 5 different countries, and forces nearly double their strength. There are a number of factors that led to this, from the Suez Crisis to frequent raids from smaller militia groups in the region, to the Soviet Union getting itself involved, falsely reporting that Israeli troops were amassing on the Syrian border. The point, however, is that Egypt moved its forces into the Sinai Peninsula, signing a defensive pact with the then King of Jordan, and further extending the alliance to Iraq. Syria joined in too, and Lebanon would further provide assistance to this coalition in united cause to destroy this fledgling state. People in Israel, of course, were, in a word, afraid. As the enemy capitals paraded their arms and spoke of their declaration of war, the world's media spoke with trepidation of the fate of Israel. The people of the country waited for their leader to speak, and Prime Minister Levi Eshkol did so. It didn't go well. He stuttered and stumbled his way through his written lines. At one point, he became so flustered that the audio had to be cut for 7 seconds before he resumed. This did very little to restore anyone's confidence, and all the while, the date of conflict drew closer. Over in the West, people were concerned. So they turned to the primary figure of the Jewish people in the United States, the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Ihre Brüder und Schwestern, was gefühlt sich in Eretz Akedesh in Eretz Israel, stehen nicht in einem Lager, wo der Rebbe beschützt sie und schickt sie seine Brüche und Atzwoche und Yeshua in a vergrößerte Moss, gedei sie soll nach Riss kommen und sie will nach Riss kommen, von dem ichtigen Maße mit Hatzlocho, die schafft dem Lewetter bejatzichem. A 7 in Eretz Israel werden sitzen dort sicher, und jeder von euch und mir alle zusammen, und bin Jucha die Jiden in Eretz Agdesha, wollen sein dem obersten Volk, was Eretz-Yaris-Jiden, bejode am Roya Absuche Agdesha Varchova, von allen Schwierigkeiten.
He spoke, of all things, of safety and security and God's promises, and one other thing of, in his eyes, massive importance, the obligation to wear tefillin, the prayer boxes worn by Jewish men, that are a profoundly important notion in Judaism, specifically in regards to the safety of the Jewish people.
Der Zetes aber sein Mazel Shebashamayim und schluckt sich nicht und bleibt.
So, people were sent out. A campaign was started all across the country with the Rebbe's words printed front page of Israeli newspapers. Students, even, would go to soldiers and help them wear tefillin, sometimes for the first time. The campaign spread across the entirety of their armed forces, and within the civilian population too, most recognizing the importance of this act and his words. And, frankly, in that time, little else to turn to. After a time of this, confidence was restored to a slight extent, although with a healthy dose of trepidation. And then Israel struck. Prior, the Israeli Air Force had been training their pilots into an advanced, rapid, repeating strike force, often using mock simulations, and always in total secrecy. No one knew the full extent of Israeli capability in this regard, and no one could have guessed. For reference, the average sortie of their opponent pilots were 1 to 2 times a day. The Israeli pilots could fly double that. On June 5th, 1967, Israel weaponized this force and launched Operation Focus. A series of preemptive precision strikes all across Egypt were then sent out against their entire air force. Due to a number of external factors that Israeli intelligence had accounted for, their enemies' planes were not left properly defended and had no way to stop what was coming for them. Approximately 90% of the entire Egyptian Air Force was destroyed on day 1 of the war. The same would be done to Syria.
Was waged against us mainly from the air, almost exclusively from the air. With such overwhelming strength and continued, sustained air attack on every single unit, on every single formation of our armed forces, day and night.
Israel now had total control over the skies. Immediately afterwards, the Israeli troops surged forward, destroying the far larger Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian armies and reclaiming the old city of Jerusalem. The war lasted 6 days. The Sinai Peninsula was seized too, and peace of a sort was established for the time being. Deals were made, land was given back, much to the chagrin of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and things moved on. Times got better. The Rebbe instituted the full scope of his ideas, which was to institute the framework for a massively complex system of Jewish outreach and assistance, something which he would dedicate his entire life to.
כולם עם מסכות? כן.
23 לחודש, 10 בלילה, שוב אזעקה.
לצלם את אבא. תחיקו את הרדיו.
Then, years passed. Tensions arose yet again in the Middle East, and it resulted in war. In late 1990, Saddam Hussein, an Iraqi revolutionary, rose to power in his country and threatened Israel with acquired Scud missiles during the events of the war, hoping to raze major cities in their country, like Tel Aviv or Haifa, to the ground. If such an attack was launched, deaths would be counted in the thousands. In addition, there was a serious concern that the missiles would be loaded with chemical warheads, and people were afraid, buying gas masks and locking themselves in their bomb shelters for days on end. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, older now, spoke.
ימים קשים אלה, הברכה של הרב חשובה לנו.
איזה ימים קשים זה ימים ערב חידוש ארץ. כבר אמרתי שכתוב מכול בארץ ישראל אין השם אלוקיך בראשית השנה רק ראשון.
Again, he repeated his points. The land of Israel, in spite of how it may seem, is the safest place in the world. The gas masks were unnecessary, as was the panic to a greater extent. Fear does nothing, least of all when it is not needed.
Der Mond in dem Jalkut Shemeni, wegen welches man gerät mehrere Mal in den letzten Wochen. Beschaß in der Welt ist nicht ruhig und Malchus Misgori zu Basu, was sagt, Abonai, wo man Atem nicht holen, was will tracht ihr wegen der Schrecken sich. Mit Zadru, was Israelam, sein nicht beschollen, eine wie die zweite, wo ihr sollt wissen sein, wie Messiaim in dem Jalkut Shemeni. Al Mishiachon shel Israel, Gelam shel Israel, steht schein Nitzter, al Gage shel Beis HaMikdash.
אנחנו גבירותיי ורבותיי, כאן
שוב מעונן מערב עיראק, אף אחד לא מאמין לי.
42 missiles, each containing several hundred pounds of explosives, were fired at major cities in Israel. They struck one after the other, and the casualties were 2. A few others died from incorrect usage of their gas masks. And so, a while later, the crisis was over, the war ending on the Jewish holiday of Purim. Saddam Hussein was deposed and executed, and peace of a sort was established for the time being.
الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالإعدام شنقا حتى الموت لارتكاب العمد كجريمة ضد الإنسانية وفق المادة 12 أولا أليف بدلالة المادة 12 أولا ثانيا ثالثا رابعا من قانون المحكمة الجنائية العراقية.
And now, tensions arise in the Middle East, and it could escalate into war. If, God forbid, such a thing occurs, at the very least know this. Please, try to do the right things. Put on tefillin. Do something good for somebody. Say a prayer. Be kind to one another. And, most of all, at the very least, do not be afraid. Clearly, there is nothing new under the sun.